Thanks for tuning into the Urban Scope podcast. I'm back with another Inside the Scope edition. Uh, Today I will be covering Kid Cudi's Man on the Moon review. Now I know a lot of people are thinking like, why are you reviewing these albums that are so old? Well, I wasn't able to review these albums when they were out because we really didn't have. Well, I don't think podcasts wasn't out back then. I didn't really have a platform to review these albums, and I just wanted to talk about what these albums meant for me as a hip hop fan, and to be able to break these albums down to what they mean to me and their importance in hip hop. So this is why I cover a lot of the older albums before I'm covering these new albums, because I just want to talk about the greatness of the albums that influenced me in hip hop. But Man on the Moon, End of the Day by Kid Cudi, his debut album as well, released in 2008. Now this album, and I talked about this with Nas's album as well, and Biggie's album. So Nas's Illmatic and Biggie's Life After Death album, Ready to Die album, sorry. They only sold, a minuscule amount of albums considered for what their greatness was. And Kid Cudi's Man on the Moon, End of the Day is the same. It only sold around 100,000 copies in the first week, but it went on to go 4 times platinum with the streaming and all of those type things factored in. So it was a very successful album. It started off a little bit slower in terms of hip hop back then. Nowadays, 100,000 is very good. Back then, it was considered okay, I guess, or on a little bit on the lower end. But I think a lot of people didn't catch on to the album at first because he had that song Day and Night, which was catchy. But a lot of time when you come out with a big hit like Day and Night, a lot of people think that you might be a one hit wonder, and they might not. And that might be pessimistic about listening to your music. But me, on the other hand, when I hear a big hit, I want to see what the artist has, the other tracks they have, because I know that song was just a gimmicky song, a commercial song to get on the radio. And I want to see the I want to listen to the B-sides, because I'm more interested in the B-sides to see where the true artistry is. And that's when you find out the true measure of an artist. But this album, I haven't heard an album per se like this before or after. Now, there's been people that try to emulate this album, but the experimentation and the bravery that he had on this song was monumental. It was pivotal. So he had elements of not only hip hop, but rock, pop, R&B. It was very melodic. So for him to, and they had melodic artists back then, but you had your Ja Rules, you had 50 Cent, all of these artists had elements of melodies in their music, but it was a whole nother level. Because like I said, he was experimenting with so many different genres, and it made sense and it sounded right. If you ask somebody 10 years ago, how would a hip hop album with elements of rock, pop, electronic, R&B, they would say it would be all over the place. Nobody would understand it. It wouldn't make sense. But he made it make sense. There's been elements of rock in hip hop before, when you think about a Run DMC and artists in the 80s and things like that, and hip hop artists in the 80s. But nobody's combined all these different genres, and he had this sound that no one ever had before. And, he influenced artists like, Lil Uzi Vert and a Travis Scott to do what they're able to do now, to experiment with these sounds, to put melodies together like this, like an R&B album or something along those lines. But I think this album embodied hip hop, because hip hop is about being your genuine self. And Kid Cudi is all those things, or at least he was all those things, to be able to be real creative in that process. His music now is a lot different. After that Man on the Moon, the second album, after the second album he put out, it became very different. But this album was, what do they call it? The chef's kiss. It was very groundbreaking for hip hop, and a lot of people emulated their sounds off of him. He even had Kid Cudi. He even had Kanye on this album working on it with him, and that shows you the backing that he had behind him and the belief that he had behind him as well. just off of mixtapes and songs that he had already put out. So he had a lot of steam going into this. But this album, he was very vulnerable on this album as well, and that's what I like. He was very expressing of his feelings, especially in hip hop. They don't express their feelings a lot unless it's hate for somebody or riding on somebody or something like that. But he was very vulnerable about his life and about what he went through, and he talked about his purpose, finding out his purpose in life, and just being able to find peace as well, just being able to find himself, because a lot of people might not never find themselves. So in the album, he did have commentary from Common, which was excellent, just talking about just basically poetry and motion. He was talking about commentary about just life and just finding your purpose in life and how some people won't find that. So this album was very introspective and very creative. So In My Dreams, the intro, very amazing song. I think he spilled his heart out on this song, and he wore his heart on his sleeves on this album as well. But that In My Dreams Cutter anthem was very good. The soundtrack to my life is basically his autobiography, and he talked about how he lost his dad, and he hasn't been right since, and he's been going through so many things. So he was basically sitting on the couch on this song and talking about his life and what's going on and where he wants to go. And then I like the song My World as well with Billy Cravens. Very good song. And he just talked about, how he believes the world will be his. And he talked about also just how he believes in himself. Like I said, he was very vulnerable on this album. Day and Night, everyone knows about that song. That's that was the lead single for this album. Sky Might Fall, which was produced by Kanye West. Very good production with the lyrics, and just talking about, regardless of what happens, I'm still going to be me. I'm still going to try to figure me out. So the world can be falling down around me, but I'm going to still, figure out my purpose and figure out what I need to do and still try to pull myself up by my bootstraps. That song's a very good song. Make Her Say, like I said, it was a very commercial hit. I didn't really care for it as much. But Higher, like that's one of those songs where it's a smoking song, but you don't have to be a smoker to love the song just because the beat and the lyrics was such a perfect marriage. But this is definitely one of the top 10 albums I think that influenced me to hip hop the most. And this album was very, like I said, it was very creative, and it was something so different. It made you feel like you wasn't in this world. Kind of like what Jay-Z talked about with the Nas stuff. Felt like we was, it was so ahead. Like we wasn't supposed to get this album until 2050 or something, but we got it in 08. He was on a roll back then, and the next album was good as well. The follow up to this album, I didn't listen to the third one as much. Like I said, Kid Cudi started experimenting with rock music and all these other different things, so he totally went left as far as hip hop goes. He became more of a pop artist, but this album was hip hop in its entirety, even though he experimented with so many different sounds. But if you haven't listened to the album, I definitely recommend this album. It definitely turned me on to hip hop even more, and for me to be able to just be myself and be influenced by that type of music and by that type of vulnerability. So thanks for tuning into the Urban Scope podcast. Until next time, I'll see you next time.